We've all heard of the expression, the book was better than the movie, or the remake just wasn't quite as good as the original. You know, sometimes the remake is better, sometimes not. Almost like when you recook something, sometimes it tastes better when you warm it up than when you cooked it the first time. So sometimes the remake could be more successful than the original. Sometimes, because people recognize the scenes, it's more successful. It has more meaning to you. Almost like when you read the story the second time, there's something special about it because you've already read that story. So it has something unique because it's familiar. You know, you like going back to that same hotel because you feel comfortable because you've been there before, even though it's not necessarily original. We're comfortable with what we've already done. So taking something that you're already familiar with and remaking it, meaning updating it and making it sound more interesting, and so on and so forth. So the question is, if when you have the remake, do you stay with the original message or you don't? And this is the challenge. And this is the challenge we have in our life in general with people that don't speak our language, whether it's the actual language, if they only talk Spanish or if they only talk Hebrew, or if they don't talk your language, meaning they're not your type of personality and you have a hard time expressing yourself to them. Now, sometimes you want to educate your children and you try to get them to understand your language or the way you're speaking. Now, it's especially connected to Jewish people, to the Jews that were given the Torah, which is over 3,300 years old. It's an ancient Torah to an ancient nation. The Torah was given to Moses over 3,300 years ago. And it's not modern and fresh. And we're still continuing it because it is modern and fresh. So we have to try to explain today how to sort of take that old-fashioned Torah and connect it and make it fresh in our day-to-day lives. Now, obviously, because the message is strong, the same message is strong every single day of your life. Now, the question is, how can we repackage the Torah and bring its message to today without losing its original message? How can we create the Torah and remake it, so to speak, without losing the point? There are many people that explain the Torah, but completely corrupted it. They corrupted the message. How can we possibly get it right? Today, we're going to talk about two incidents that the Torah went through a significant change. What I mean a change is, as you'll see as follows. The Torah was translated twice. Now, beginning with this text, as we're going to explain. The Torah, the words of the Torah is very serious. The reason that words of the Torah is very serious is because that's the words that God said it to Moses, and Moses said it to the Jews on Mount Sinai. When you translate it, the grammar changes. Let's think of a word in Yiddish. I'm sure you all heard of the word kvetch. Now, the word kvetching is a Yiddish word. Now, go translate that word into English. Complain. What else? Whining, nagging, nudging. Again, it's back to Yiddish. But go take the word schlep, let's say, which is to carry something, and translate it into English. It loses its beauty, so to speak. So the Torah was given in Hebrew, and then it had to be translated. The challenge is, as the Maimonides writes to one of his students here in text number 1, one of the Maimonides students wanted to translate the Maimonides, which was written in Arabic, and he wanted to translate it into Hebrew. So the Rambam said there's a challenge to do that, because it strips the original concept. And who says that the translation will still give the original message? Now, even though we still have the same message today, but it's missing the language if you don't have the Hebrew. As we're soon going to see that the translation of the Torah was a task that not everyone was able to do, because you're taking words, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and God spoke to Moses. Something already just changed when I translated that. Look, Vayomer means to speak. El Hashem, God, to Moses. I changed it. I said, and God spoke to Moses. The message is the same, but the translation had to change, because in English you don't say spoke God to Moses. That's not the proper grammar. So think about it. Things change. The order changes. The translation, maybe the message doesn't change, but something changes. So it's risky, so to speak, when you translate the Torah. So let's understand a little deeper. Let's go to text number 2a, as you see on the screen. The first time the Torah was translated.
Rabbi, excuse me, I don't see it on the screen.
You don't see the screen?
No.
How could that be? What do you see on the screen?
It was a black screen, just blank.
So black.
How about now? Anything on the screen now? So the screen is black. Okay, stop sharing. Now you see nothing,
now
right?
I see you.
Now you see me. That's wonderful. That's okay. How about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So now, as you see in the text here, now the book of Deuteronomy was written close to Moses's past. They were in Moab on the east side, on the south side of the river, ready to enter Israel. Israel was almost in their sight. They were able to see the land of Israel. Moses was giving over to the Jewish people, number one, the history that happened over the last 40 years in the desert. He gave them over laws. And number three, he prepared them for the arrival into Israel. Now, if you look in the last word of this text, it says, Be'er. Be'er means commenced, which means, according to the commentaries, it means that Moses translated the Torah to 70 languages, as you see in the Rashi in text number 2b. Moses translated the Torah to 70 languages, which is absolutely fascinating. The Torah was in Hebrew, and Moses translated it to 70 languages. Why now? Why not 30 years ago? Why did he translate it now? Does anybody have a clue why he did the translation now at this point? Why would you think Moses would do the translation now and not at an earlier date? What was it? Why was it so crucial? Besides the fact that Moses is about to die, but why is it so crucial to be done now? Anyone has a clue?
Moses foresaw that there would be a need for people to understand it in many different languages,
Good.
but they were not going to remain all the time in the land of Israel.
Or better more, Moses translated it as a preparation to enter the land of Israel where they'll be amongst the nations. Now they're in the desert. It's like being in yeshiva. It's like being in a ghetto where there's nobody else around. Now that you're going into the land of Israel, you got to get ready and be prepared to inspire the nations of the world. Now, they're going into a new culture, paganism and child sacrifice, all kinds of stuff that's idol worshiping. In order to be able to inspire the nations, you have to talk their language. The Jewish people have to spread the ideas of the Torah to others. Therefore, Moses, with the permission of God, translated it to 70 languages. Now, it was so popular that the nations of the world sent their scribes to write it up from Moses's translation. It wasn't like he had a printer where you could just copy it. It had to actually be written up. Now, the nations accepted the laws that apply to them. Many laws apply to the nations as well. In any case, we were in for a good start. But 1,000 years later, when Talmai HaMelech, which was one of the Greek kings, wanted to translate the Torah into Greek, so this Greek king, Talmai, he was Talmai the second. He took over Talmai the first, and ultimately Talmai the first took over Alexander the king, which was a Greek king. It was in the state of Greek. In any case, Talmai made a Greek library. For his Greek library, he wanted to translate the Torah into Greek. Now, it's unclear why he wanted to translate it if Moses translated it already. So ultimately, we probably didn't have it anymore, that translation. So Talmai wanted to translate the Torah into Greek for his Greek library, which is a very famous, huge library. The rabbi said that the day Talmai wanted to translate it into Greek was as hard as it was the day that the Jewish people bowed to the idols. But wait a minute. What's the issue? Moses translated it into Greek, and it was very successful. What was the serious issue that the rabbis were worried that it's like such a harsh day to translate it into Greek? And you're saying it's as hard as the day that the Jews bowed to the idol? And by the way, as a side point, as you see here in text number 4, we say that translation to Greek is actually the most precise. The translation to Greek is pretty exact, more than any other language. So that should be another reason why it should be considered proper. Now, generally, when you translate the Torah into another language, it's not holy, meaning you can't read the Torah in English in the synagogue. It has to be Hebrew, because it doesn't have the holiness as it does when you read it in Hebrew. according to some opinions, when it's translated into Greek, it has holiness like a Torah, which means Greek is the most proper translation. So why were the rabbis all stressed out and said that it's like the day the Jewish people bow to the idol? So let's give a little refresh of what happened when the Jewish people bowed to the idol, and we'll be able to understand what this is all about. I don't think this is an exact picture of how the idol looked, but it was similar to this idea of golden calf. Does have a pretty impressive look, had it not been an idol. And the Jewish people basically said, you know, Moses is not around anymore. He either died or he's staying in the mountain. This was the day before the idol worshiping, which was the 17th of Tammuz. And the Jewish people started getting worried. They said, we don't know what happened to Moses. They didn't want to replace God with this idol. They wanted to replace Moses. Now it got serious, and the next day, they started bowing to the idol. But the story doesn't make sense. Didn't you guys see the miracles? And didn't you listen to God saying at Mount Sinai, do not bow to idols? How is it that they made a 180-degree turn? How? How is it possible? And why did Aaron even support it? Moses' brother. I mean, are you guys absent-minded? That you don't remember that God said you shouldn't bow to idols? I mean, this is pretty, this happened a little while ago. Why would the Jewish people, what drove them to bow to idols already? Now, what they were looking for was a human connection, meaning the Ramban explains, one of the commentaries, great commentaries on the Torah, rabbi in Spain in 1194 through 1270, they needed something physical to replace. Moses was a physical human being, and they felt connected to God because of that physical human being, and now they were lacking that. Moses walked in front of them. Moses led them the direction. Moses helped them. Now, how are we going to be led? So Moses brought godliness live and practical. But when they thought Moses is gone, they said, wait a minute, what are we going to do? We need something to replace it. All right, we'll create an idol. Idols could also represent godliness because God is everywhere. So we're going to utilize this idol to show that God could even come down in an idol. God could be everywhere. And the proof to it is, look what happened later. A little while later, Moses said to build a tabernacle. What did the tabernacle consist of? Gold, silver, copper, but plenty of gold. The keruvim, which was the two birds on top of the ark, was fully gold. The ark had gold. The menorah had gold. God spoke to Moses through the keruvim. So the issue basically is they were trying to get to this physical touch that they were lacking. Now, obviously, they could have had some patience and waited a day or two, but they were very desperate because they felt a void. It's almost like they didn't have this. Moses was in front of them the whole time. Okay, so he said he's going to leave for 40 days, but he was late, they thought. So the goal is to bring godliness not only to humans, but also to inanimate objects. And that's what they thought they'll accomplish by creating the idol. And therefore, Aaron said, we'll make a party tomorrow because Aaron thought that we could make this into something spiritual. The problem was, it was a human idea. It didn't come from God. It didn't come from God that appointed Moses. God appointed and said, build the tabernacle. Build it. You can't do it on your own. And that's a crucial problem. To bring godliness into something physical, as the Rebbe discusses here in text number 9, to bring godliness into something physical is dangerous. You need God's help. Pick a simple example. Only God says that that meat is kosher. Now that God said it's kosher, I could eat it and uplift it to holiness. God said that you're permitted to do certain things. And when you do it, then and only then can it be utilized for holiness. You can't steal and say, I'm going to give it to charity. That's a no-no. Because God doesn't let you steal. God lets you earn an honest living and then give it to charity. So if it comes from Hashem, it's safe. Because Moses was Hashem's agent. Moses is like God's hands and feet, so to speak. But once it's not invented by Hashem and it comes on your own, then it's dangerous. And that's the difference between the gold in the tabernacle and the gold you made on your own. Moses and the tabernacle were commissioned by Hashem. They're words of God, like water that goes through a pipe. The pipe doesn't have power to create water. It's just a passageway of the water. Moses was the passageway of bringing God through him. But the idol was an idea of humans. And within 24 hours, they were bowing to idols. Here's our issue. You can't make up your own ideas.
Rabbi,
Today,
so-
try.
I was just going to say that there's another perspective on this, and I've always thought about this, that they were slaves in Egypt for 400 years, generations. Egyptians worshiped cattle and golden cattle, and they've only seen the miracles of the Exodus. That was a recent occurrence. They had a heritage of like being in Egypt, their fashion, the way they dressed, all those things. So I think it's almost like they panicked when Moses went up and they reverted to like what they knew from history, from their association.
Right.
I think it has some basis in that. I mean, the Egyptians worshipped all sorts of animals. So they probably reverted to what they knew, and that's why they did that. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there's almost a historical basis for what they did because of the way they had 400 years of history of living in Egypt, and they saw what Egyptians did. Pharaohs were God and everything else.
So that's a very good point. But the idea we're trying to bring out is we're trying to speak positive, that the Jews actually did, similar to what you're saying, that they didn't really mean something bad, but we're saying it even further. They actually considered it something holy.
Yeah, they thought they were doing a good thing. Right.
Yeah.
I want to make one other point that you were asking about before, when you were saying that Moses translated the Torah to 70 languages.
Yeah.
I've always thought it was amazing that the Torah was not given in Israel. The Torah was given in the desert. And the future was that the Jews would go around the world. So it almost makes sense that Moses was prophetic because you'd have the diaspora Jews were in every country. So it would make sense that it was translated into 70 languages because that was the future.
Yeah.
Nobody
To prepare for the future.
It was
Exactly.
preparing for the future. Right. So there's a logic to that as well.
Yes, very good. Okay, so here's the point. When you're doing something independent of what God said to do, it gets very dangerous. Now, let's go back to our question. Why were the rabbis so stressed and nervous when Talmai wanted to translate the Torah into Greek? And they said it's as serious as the day of the idol worship. Here is what they realized. They realized the risk. They understood the culture. The Greek culture was completely against Judaism. Therefore, it's a risk. It might be important to translate it, but it could also be very dangerous. By the way, if anybody wants to turn on their camera so I could see you, I would love to see your face. Don't be shy. Even if you're in your pajamas, it's perfectly fine. As long as you're dressed from your head up, you're good. I love seeing faces. Okay. So just like the idol worshiping was such a risky task that ultimately it was turned out negative. They were nervous. You're going to translate it to Greek. It could be positive. It could turn out negative. Just like it turned out negative by the idol. Now the rabbis were successful in translating it into Greek with the ideas of the Torah. Even though they were nervous, but it ended up being successful. The remake was actually successful, and it connected with the original. We see how they were able to take the message, and Moses translated it for the nations of the world, because Moses realized you cannot just be passive. If you continue it the way it is, it's not going to connect. You have to create ways to communicate our timeless values. Now, just like you need 2 points. You need to make it relevant in order to reach far places. We have to be responsible and cautious. No incident highlights this more than the day they translated it into Greek. The rabbis were very concerned, but it was done not in a careless way, but in a very careful way. On one hand, we want to spread Judaism in all kinds of places. But on the other hand, we don't want to do it in a corrupt way. And this is how we repackage our old values in a new way. We have to see how to bring it to a new audience. And simultaneously be aware of the challenges. You know, if you're going to teach, if you're going to get involved in people that are on a lower level than you and are corrupt, so to speak, you have to be careful how you give them that message. They might take the words of the Torah, like let's say the Kabbalah. If you take Kabbalah the way it is, it could be very hard, and you might connect it to a certain way of your life, which is incorrect. You might start doing things incorrectly. You might say, oh, if I meditate about God, that's enough. I don't have to practice. That's wrong. Now, the point is like this. You must be careful to bring this idea to everybody. But Do it with caution and accountability. In the recent generation, the Rebbe came out with the idea of bringing a mitzvah mobile into the street. So the first mitzvah tank in Manhattan, they drove to Manhattan and it would stand out like a shoal on wheels. Now, that mitzvah tank was original. Everybody said, how can you bring Judaism into the street? Judaism belongs in the synagogue or in the yeshiva. You can't bring Judaism into the street. But it was done in a respectful and appropriate way. To stop a Jew in the street, ask him to put on tefillin. Of course, in a respectful way, you're bringing Judaism practical way into the street. Each and every one of us could reflect on an incident in our lives that you were challenged. Take your values, which are very dear to you, and translate it to someone else. If a non-Jew might ask you why you're wearing tzitzis, so instead of hiding it, you'll explain. Or if you're wearing a kippah, or if you're eating kosher, or if you're celebrating Shabbos, whatever you're doing. You explain to your coworker what it's all about. You made Passover in your house, or you did Shabbat in your house, and you do it in a lively way to engage everybody. How do you manage to keep the original message and make it relevant? How do you navigate this? And this is what you have to accomplish. Bring it to your family, bring it to your friends, but sort of update it. God forbid, you can never change the Torah. You're supposed to bring the Torah to the people, not the people to the Torah. What that means is don't adopt and change the Torah. Keep the Torah the way it is and bring it to them. I think every one of us could leave this class with a double message. Number one, just like Moses had to be proactive in spreading our values, it's our job to translate the Torah more and more in every generation. What's important to you is not enough. You might speak about putting on tefillin to someone or lighting Shabbat candles to someone because it means a lot to you, but eventually the message won't get to them. You need to be creative. Tell them, put on tefillin and take a selfie and send it to me. Oh, you just got creative. Now the guy might want to put on the tefillin because he wants to send you a selfie. I don't know if you could do that for Shabbat candles. Maybe she could light it just as a prep for Shabbos and then do the real light. Or take a picture of her candles that are lit on the table, that are prepared on the table, ready to be lit. Whatever it may be. Be daring. Think of something out of the box. And that's what the Rebbe did. Sent out shluchim all over the world. Ask people to put on tefillin, put up a mezuzah. The Rebbe created Tzivot Hashem, where every child is in God's army. Unbelievable ideas to keep Judaism alive in a real way. We must be responsible the way we do it. The message you give might be misunderstood to others. Only if you do it in a responsible way and do the remake in a responsible way, then it'll be able to be understood to everybody. You can't say, oh, kosher doesn't exist today because kosher is old-fashioned. That's wrong. That's adopting to, a different concept. Here you have a beautiful mitzvah tank, probably in Manhattan. I remember when I was a kid in Detroit in the 70s, we had one mitzvah tank. We would drive to downtown Detroit. It was a lot of fun. My sister lives in Kelowna, which is a little town in Canada, for those of you that are aware. And My brother-in-law drives around to visit Jews miles and miles away, and he has a mitzvah tank, and it's like a mini synagogue with a little Torah and some Jewish books and a kosher kitchen, and it's got the works in that little mobile. So our key message today is you can never change the Torah. You can just explain the Torah in a way that will be able to connect to others in an explanatory way that others will be able to relate to it as well. And that's why they were nervous to translate it to Greek. They were worried it's going to lose the message. But thank God the message was kept and the idea was kept, and it was a very successful mission. So next time you want to explain somebody something about Judaism, keep the message, keep to your values, and keep to what's dear to you in your heart, and don't give in to others that are trying to navigate and change your values. Thank you very much for joining. It's great to see you all, and have a wonderful rest of the Rosh Chodesh and a good Chodesh to everybody. And don't forget to keep the laws of the 9 days and try to be happy through Torah study. Sei gesund, everyone.
Quick funny story that happened. When I was in Los Angeles, one of the kids in my class wanted to rent a mitzvah tank for Lag BaOmer. So he calls up budget and he says, "Anschuldig's, Mir, do you have tanks?" And the guy on the other end had no idea what he was talking about. We always knew RVs as tanks, right?
Right.
But he didn't know. He
Right.
says, "Do you have tanks? Can I rent a tank?"
Right, that's
It was funny. Those were good
Right,
days.
we call it a mitzvah tank, right? That's true, yeah.
Call them tanks. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
sei gesund, everyone. It's
Sei
great to
gesund.
see you all.